Good evening, welcome. My name is Isra Al-Bashir. I'm the Director of Art Museum and Galleries. And first, I want to thank you all for braving the weather and coming here, sharing this very moment with us. I couldn't be more thrilled to share Long Time No See and for you all to experience it yourselves and to hear it from Stephanie Shih, whose voice and vision has shaped every corner and section of this exhibition, so every detail. I'm incredibly proud and pleased to present the culmination of our residency program, which I'll speak to in a bit. The exhibition title, Stephanie Shih, Long Time No See, brings to light unacknowledged histories in our holdings. This project is a result of our inaugural artisan residency that launched in 2023, aimed at bringing fresh perspectives to our permanent collection. Though through Stephanie's innovative lens, she has woven together a profound narrative that centers our renowned collection of Chinese export porcelain and also simultaneously exploring the complexities of the Asian American experience, particularly that of the immigrant experience. And this is the culmination of that residency project, this incredible exhibition that produces a new body of 15 still life photographic pieces. And also brings this new set of fresh perspectives that deepens the relevancy of our collections today. So before introducing Stephanie, I want to take a moment to express my gratitude. On behalf of the museums, I am deeply grateful to the Terra Foundation for American Art for their generous support, which has enabled our vision to take shape. I also extend that gratitude to the university's Museum Art Fund and the Reeves Endowment. Together with their support, this would not have been realized. To our brilliant interpretive committee and curatorial consultants, Dr. Jacqueline Chow, who serves as the curator of Asian art at the Dallas Museum of Art, Rachel Du, a specialist in Chinese art and history, who also is joining us this term as the visiting curator of Asian art and is with us today, and Kelly Fu, who is a doctoral candidate in early modern Chinese global history at Stanford University, who's also with us today. Thank you, thank you. Their collective expertise has helped us expand the depth and the narrative in ways that highlight the complexities, the nuances of the series, and that you will experience when you walk through the galleries. A special thank you to Nadine Kharbutli, who introduced me to Stephanie Shih's remarkable work and helped bring this project to life with her support and constant encouragement. Thank you. I am deeply honored to be part of a community of devoted professionals at W&L, and I'm indebted to the unwavering support of my wonderful colleagues and museum team, particularly Dr. Nayeli Guillen, Kyra Swanson, Robert Forsberg, I can't see you, back there, thank you, who worked tirelessly over the past 6 months to actualize this exhibition. And it's their dedication to the mission that allows us to continually build on the legacy of the Reeves collection, its founders and curators, and to expand and evolve the collection into the resource it is today. Our community, including the Lexington community, has also played a critical role in supporting the residency, which was as much more about collaboration as it was about creation. From helping Stephanie to source plants, to ethically sourcing and donating insects, this residency was truly a community endeavor and one that was inspiring to witness. I would like to recognize Professor Andrea LePage, chair of the Art and Art History Department, and her fabulous team, whose collaboration and fellowship were central to the success of the residency, and also David Pfaff and his team at the IQ Center for their technical expertise and creative problem solving. While there are so many more people I would love to thank individually, I also want to make sure we give space and time for Stephanie to tell us about her story and her journey here. To everyone, museum staff, students, and community members, 1,000 thanks for helping shape this project. None of this would have come to fruition if it wasn't for your dedication. So thank you. Before I welcome Stephanie to the stage, or podium, I should say, let me end with an introduction. So Stephanie is an LA-based visual artist and photographer known for her painterly use of shadow and her playful perspectives on food. Though her interest in photography began with her father's half-frame camera on childhood road trips, she took it up seriously in graduate school while moonlighting as a wedding cake maker. The result is a fascinating intersection of the visual and the culinary, a thread that continues through her work, and as you will see in the galleries. Stephanie has exhibited at prestigious venues such as Hashimoto Contemporary in LA, the Griffin Museum of Photography, the Royal Photographic Society in the UK, and USC Pacific Asia Museum, and now the museums at WNL. Her photography has been featured in a number of media outlets, including Bloomberg Businessweek, Gastronomica, Buzzfeed, and the Los Angeles Times. When she is not in her studio creating, she is a professor of linguistics at the University of Southern California. It is truly an honor to have you with us tonight. So everyone, please help me in welcoming Stephanie back to WNL and to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me from this mic here? No. So I have to stand like this. Okay, this will be interesting. So thank you so much to Israel for that intro, and thank you all for coming out on this damp night. Thank you so much to the museum's team for having me here again, and for this whole project, and I will do more thank yous at the end. So as an artist, I've always been drawn to the detritus that surrounds us as we move through the world, how things, food, object, trash, that we touch and use and discard contribute to carrying meaning that define us in the world and our beliefs and our affiliations with societies and cultures. Some people are really interested in people. I'm really interested in the things that people leave behind. And as Isra has just said, I'm also a linguist and cognitive scientist. And as a scientist, my work in that realm has always been about how the smallest bits and pieces of language, like the patterns of sounds or how we choose to pronounce a word, come together to signal much larger categories and contrasts and symbols in the way that we communicate with each other. So in both of these domains, my work is driven by this really uniting philosophy that these small, often really subconscious details are actually the keys to how we symbolically interpret and make sense of the world in our minds as we move through it. As a scientist, what I do is I work on understanding these patterns and predicting them. And as an artist, I get to play with our understanding of these patterns. I get to break them and sort of recode these symbologies into new messages and new meanings. So still life is this genre that I've chosen to work on because it's so deeply built and rooted in symbologies. One example of symbology in still life that has a very long history is this practice of painting the trompe l'oeil fly into paintings. Now, this is a photograph, but back in the 15th and 16th centuries in Europe, they would paint these flies into oftentimes religious paintings as sort of a signal of either sin or corruption or mortality, something that was wrong with us as humans, but not wrong with gods as immortals, right? And so it's these little symbologies that get hidden into these paintings that's really interesting to me. On the other side of the world, Chinese art also often encompasses what's known as rebuses. So these are visual puns that often reflect linguistic puns. We can see many of these types of rebuses in the collection here at WNL on the ceramics. You'll see this piece if you head over to the galleries later. And on this piece, there are two roosters and some peonies. The name for peonies basically means the flower of success and wealth. And the word for chicken or rooster is kind of a pun on, well, it sounds like the word for expectation. So put together, the two say, please expect wealth, or may you expect wealth and success. And that's the rebus that you find on this plate, or soup bowl, I guess, to be exact. So my point in these examples is that people often write off still life as these pretty little flower pictures. But actually what they are really insidious, powerful ways of subliminal messaging, of getting across concepts into someone else's mind without being too obvious about it. And language is also this way. Language is a way that we beam concepts into each other's minds, which is really magical and the thing I love to tell my students first day of class. And so I get to do both, which is wonderful. And so we get to take these expectations that we have in language and play with them and break them in art. And in the context of still life history and practice, what my work does is asks, well, what's the visual language telling us? Who gets to speak this visual language? Who gets to break this visual language? Who has the authority over this language? Whose stories get to be told within this language? Who gets to listen to these languages? Who gets to respond to these stories? And who gets to drive the changes of these languages? And who gets to see themselves in the art? And so that brings us to ceramics. Ceramics have always been one of these ever-present things in my life and career. Because I work on things like food and flowers, you kind of need things to put them on. So they've always played this like background role. For food, you're looking for the coolest teacup, or for flowers, you're looking for a fun vase to put the flowers in. And so in a previous body of work, starting around 2020, 2021, I had started actually thinking about the historical paths where ceramics get to us. And one of the sort of art historical pieces that I had wanted to respond to was this tradition of European Delftware. So Delftware originated in Netherlands and then adopted in other parts of Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries. And this here is a piece of English Delftware from 1744. And it was made to copy the blue and white tradition of Chinese ceramics that was incredibly popular at that time. But because of various political things, which I won't get into today, there was they stopped importing a lot of ceramics at a particular period of time, and Europe was like, well, we got to make it ourselves. So they tried to copy these. And one of the things that they tried to do was actually like paint what they thought Chinese people looked like on the side of these ceramics. So you kind of see like these wonky scenes. And what I wanted to do in this piece responding to it was build my own flower brick. So usually you put the flowers in those little holes. And it's built out of Legos, as a play on brick for those Lego enthusiasts out there. Okay, so it was actually this piece that Isra saw before inviting me to come to the museums to do the project here. I think the connections are a little obvious here. And Isra had really pitched this project as a way for me to more deeply engage, like really work with objects, and to address the heretofore really extremely Orientalist treatment of decorative and art objects from Asia in the history of American art spaces, well, American and European art spaces. And in these types of conversations, we often hear words like repatriation and reclamation, but the worry that I had immediately when Isra invited me was, what is repatriation with these objects? They are export objects. They were made to be sold in a different country, right? So it's not like we're repatriating an object that was, say, stolen against someone's will from a particular country. I also worried about this idea of reclamation. I'm not a ceramicist. No one in my family that I know of was a ceramicist. So what is my connection, aside from just historically my family was from a similar country? We weren't even from the area of China that was making ceramics, if you really want to trace it back, right? So what do I have to say about these? And this is something I struggled with a little bit before coming here. But what broke this project wide open for me was the following realization. So oftentimes, like with Delftware and the Asian export ceramics that are in these museums, the stories of these ceramics are largely told from the perspective of European collectors, or European American collectors even. And these stories largely revolve around why the objects were valued for collection, who owned them, how they signified class, how much they were when they bought them, which ships brought them over, that sort of thing. And they were decontextualized and treated just for their value, essentially. But what I started thinking about when I finally got to see these objects in person, so the set which you will see in the galleries, is that these ceramics are actually members of the diaspora. They are immigrants who've been here in Europe and the US for almost as long, if not longer, than many of the first waves of immigration, Asian American immigration to the US. They've been here since 1700s, 1800s. Especially this set, all of these ceramics, about 70 of them total, that greet you when you first walk into the gallery. They're from three particular design families, the Canton Rose, Rose Medallion, and Famille Rose families. These families were really known for bright really garish colors. Like we would not probably want them in our dinnerware sets today, right? But they were very popular at the time. And these 70 in particular, were especially popular because they had pictures of Chinese faces on them, Chinese figures, right? And having Chinese faces on exportware was really popular in Europe and the US at the time because it was this idealized Asia that was very difficult for people to visit, right? And so the way they could experience it was to draw it on dinnerware that they would have at home, or have it drawn on dinnerware. And so all of these Chinese people on these ceramics have been immigrants that have been here since the 1800s, around the first major waves of Asian American immigration. Incidentally, this is sort of a biographical detail, I came to this realization about this project in the middle of dance class. And for any of you who have ever taken a dance class, a big component is to learn to look at yourself in a mirror. Like you spend the entire hour staring at yourself. And this is always something that I've personally hated doing, and it has screwed me up in like technique-wise. It's always bad. I'm falling out of turns because I can't look at myself. And I will like go out of my way to look anywhere else but myself. And seeing these faces look back at me from these plateware designs really reminded me of this common experience that we sometimes have growing up in the US as part of a cultural other group. We sort of learn to hate the way we look. We learn to hate other people who might look like us because we're not taken as the default. We're not taken as the standard of beauty, right? Or as people of privilege or power. And so that almost translates over time into this like visceral dislike that you have when you see someone whose face looks like yours or your own face in the mirror. It's almost this like unkindness to people of your own kind. And so Rose Piece, which you'll see, the first thing you see when you walk into the gallery, and you see this mirror, is ultimately a self-portrait, or maybe more accurately, it's a group selfie. It's a group selfie because the mirror puts me, as well as you, the viewers, amongst this family of familiar faces, American ones that look like me, who have been here in these spaces for even longer than many of our families. And it's this way of sort of taking the picture with the group together. And in this way, this residency and this project was for me sort of getting to steward a small part of the ongoing biographies and lives of these ceramics to intersect their existing historical narratives with the current ones of contemporary Asian American communities. What I wanted to do is I wanted to make a language that surrounds them, speak for them as well as for me and for the broader Asian American communities, and the communities of those who often feel like cultural others or non-defaults in the US. And hence the title Long Time No See. Long Time No See is a phrase that linguists like to call a calque, C-A-L-Q-U-E. A calque is when a phrase is borrowed from one language into another by translating word for word rather than the whole phrase at once. So we actually have several of these from Chinese and English, incidentally. Words like pot sticker come from Chinese guotie, which is literally pot plus to stick together. So you just translate one word and then the other. The purported origin story of the phrase long time no see is actually a Chinese phrase, 好久不见. It literally means long time no see. Those are the words in it. From around the late 1800s, when people were making fun of like Chinese pidgin English, right, in sort of Chinatown ghettos. And like many calques, it's since become just a very common phrase that we say in English that we don't often even realize what the origins were. Yeah, and so long time no see is my way of welcoming back very old friends. Often so omnipresent in the fabric of our culture that they've faded into the background. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to welcome them back into the foreground, back into the wider community of the Asian American diaspora, and of getting a chance to make new stories together again. Once it was clear that I was working with the biographies of these ceramics, even more narratives started to emerge that wove themselves into the stories with us because of how entangled all of these threads end up being. So alongside ceramics trade routes, you get the movement of other things like people, food, language, plants. again, the detritus of our human existences, they move through these giant global networks over time together. And so this piece, which is called Dad's Favorite Mondays, features one of the earliest export ceramics that W&L collection has, the pot in the middle. It's a mustard pot. It dates from about 1630 to 1644. And it's uniquely an export form because we didn't have really any need domestically in China for mustard-shaped pots, so this is a very popular shape in Europe. It's also uniquely export because you have the metal mount on it, and that was something they liked for the European export ceramics. Alongside it, you see a hot dog and ketchup. Now, both ketchup and mustard are very iconically American these days, but they actually have long histories in Europe and Asia. Mustard is a very, very old condiment because mustard plants grew all over the continent, or the two continents of Eurasia. Ketchup, though, is slightly more interesting from a trade perspective. So ketchup actually comes from Southeast Asian fish sauce. That's why the name is kind of odd. It's a borrowing from Cantonese. And European sailors encountered it when they were in South China Seas, brought it back to Europe, where it lost the fish, gained mushrooms, lost mushrooms, gained tomatoes, and gained sugar, and has become ketchup that we know today. Incidentally, what's really fun is it's been reborrowed back into Southeast Asia. During the war periods, post-war periods, it was hard to come by tomatoes, so people started making banana ketchup, and that's now popular in the Philippines. It just tastes like regular ketchup. I wish it tasted like bananas. Okay, so actually, it's kind of funny. I'm familiar with this history, not through food, but through linguistics, where we can trace the name of ketchup back to Cantonese. And so it's this very interesting way that we've gotten multiple strands into an iconically American condiment. Plants, as well, have traveled along these networks. At the same time that ceramics were coming to the US through the China trade, Europeans and European Americans were also very involved in programs of imperialistic botany. They would travel the world trying to find the next hot commercial plant to sell. Oftentimes, they would be looking for things that were ornamentally really pretty or would work for soil retention or some other purpose. Many of these non-native plants that they brought here have actually really long histories in their native countries or native areas of culinary and medicinal uses in their original contexts. But without these stewardship practices and being moved into a new environment, these plants would often escape cultivation and interact in really unexpected and harmful ways with the existing landscape, which you can see all over Virginia, actually. So all of the plants, with the exception of a few in Long Time No See, originate from Asia and Eurasia, but were found here in the in the hills around Lexington. For instance, the cultivated garden roses that you had seen in the previous pieces, but also the multiflora rosa, which is just all over campus, essentially. This particular piece winds together two non-native species. One is from China and one is from Europe. The one from China is kudzu. You see that in the vine in front. Kudzu was a cooking ingredient, or is a cooking ingredient in Asia. It's also an ingredient that has a long tradition in traditional Chinese medicine. In other parts of Asia, there are craft practices, like in Japan, of weaving kudzu. It was originally introduced in the US in the late 1800s and widely pushed for officially by the US government, by Congress, as well as the Soil Conservation Service, to reverse soil retention post-Dust Bowl in the South, which is why it's so common now. The other plant that you see, the one from Europe, the non-native from Europe, is English ivy. It's the branches in the back. The English ivy hails originally from Europe and Western Asia. It's an invasive non-native plant in the US, also invasive in other countries as well. And it has strong cultural significances to Western European cultures. It was brought over in the early 1700s by European colonists. So this piece that you see here is ultimately one about immigration and how being an American citizen across history and across immigrant communities has been a really sought-after status due to the protections and the privileges that are supposed to come with being an American citizen. The name of the piece takes from the first sentence in your US passport, which is the Secretary of State of the United States of America hereby requests all whom it may concern to permit the citizen of the United States named herein to pass without delay or hindrance, and in the case of need, give all lawful aid and protection. And it's a very powerful passport that many people over time have aspired to from all different places. The immigrant experience in the US, however, is often marked by this experience where our cultural products like ceramics are really highly valued, while there's a long history of concurrently trying to keep the people that produce this out, of severing, if you will, the people from the objects of desire, or in some cases actually making the people themselves the objects of desire. So at the same time that there was this incredible fervor for chinoiserie or Chinese products in Europe and America in the 1800s and 1900s, there was a concerted effort to keep Chinese people out of the US or to otherwise disenfranchise and deport those who had already immigrated here. In 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed. This poster that you see, here is from the Chinese Exclusion Act era. It's a reproduction of a print. And the Chinese Exclusion Act was actually the first major US law that targeted a specific national group from immigrating to the US, and this is a tradition that we continue today with race-based immigration policies. A big part of recontextualization for me with Long Time No See was a goal for also contemporary re-engagement with these objects. I wanted to give you all, the viewers, a way to interact with these objects that was not simply treating them as valued objects or discussing their value, but instead as objects situated in history and in context. I wanted to give you all, the viewers, agency as active members of an audience. And I felt like this recontextualization work was something that had to be done not just by me, but by all of us, partly as penance for all of us, but also partly as an act of reclamation by all of us. And this is why the objects themselves are actually carved out of each photograph, as you'll see in the galleries, so that when you are standing there in the gallery, you are playing an active role in the re-importation of the object into its context. It's a way also for me to share a small part of what I got to do myself during this residency, which was determine a small part of these objects' ongoing biographies. You get to do it too, I hope. So recontextualization for me in making Long Time No See was to find all of these strands and narratives again, bring them together, and in doing so, hopefully, to rewrite the narratives of the art historical canon such that the conversations that surround these objects do not treat these objects as just ones of monetary value or decoupled entities, but really give them the context of the people. So this piece, which you'll see in the gallery, its English name is For the Lost. It features all ceramics from shipwrecks in the South China Sea. Many of these ships, some of which were Chinese, some of which were Southeast Asian, some of which were Dutch, went down anywhere between like 1400 and 1800, late 1800s in the South China Sea during trade there. And around 1990s, an Australian named Michael Hatcher started dredging up all of these ceramics. There was also lots of gold bullion, so, really good way to make an extra buck. And so he would go and dredge up these ceramics, and they would sell at auction for millions of dollars. It was a big deal at Christie's and Sotheby's to pick these things up. I was actually at Oak Spring Garden Foundation this summer, which is the old Mellon estate, and they have an incredible library of rare books. But the librarian was taking us around, and I was telling her what I had been doing at W&L, and she was like, oh, come, and takes me into this room and opens a cabinet, and it's just all shipwreck ceramics there, just hanging out in the cabinet. So really popular collector's item. To the best of my knowledge, the ceramics here that you see today have not yet been shown after being acquired by W&L. And one of the things that I really wanted to make sure the first time they're shown is to make the presence of the people on these ships undeniable. One of the most well-documented ships was the Texing, and we know about it because it was in a port the day before, and so we have the registries from that ship. The Texing oftentimes is known as the Titanic of the East because 1,800 people died during that shipwreck, many of whom were Chinese immigrants. And so while I was here at WNL for my residency, many people of the Lexington and WNL community helped me fold 2,000 joss paper gold ingots, which you see here. These are paper money that we burn for ancestors in the afterlife to have money in the afterlife. And so that's what you see here, piled with the ceramics, is remembrances for them. And the piece itself is an altar that we would often build for people in the afterlife to have food and such. Yeah, so that's for the lost. The biggest surprise for me working on Long Time No See was how the project itself ended up answering the question that I had at the beginning when Israel and the museums had first invited me to come and work with this collection. This question of, how do I interpret repatriation or reclamation for export ceramics personally, for these ceramics personally. And this is something that actually often happens in academic research, so it was very surprising to me that it happened in art for me. And it was this discovery that what repatriation can be in this context is sort of a return of power or agency and being able to actually help determine a small part of these biographies of these ceramics, right? I spent 6 weeks in the studio with these things, and we got to take our little joy rides together, which is really fun. And just getting to do that personally meant a lot to me, more than I had anticipated, and I found a lot of power in that. And I think, the curators who worked with me on this show, like Rachel, we've had these conversations where that is the case for them as well. And so there are those of us who, in the communities, in the Asian American communities, who have been telling our stories for much longer, and I wanted to make sure that they were also represented in this series. And so this piece, when you go into the exhibition, you'll see it sort of to your right in the main gallery. It's called Sky Full of Stars. And it's the only piece that you'll notice in the gallery that doesn't have anything cut out. And that's because all of the ceramics are not from the collection. They are from Wing On Wo, which is a family-owned shop in New York City, Chinatown. They've been in New York City, Chinatown since 1890, around the time that many of the collection ceramics were brought to the US. And they are a Chinese-American family who have been importing export ceramics for the Asian American community since the 1800s. They're a cornerstone of the community. They support so many artists, ceramicists now, and they've been there since the 1800s. And they're much actually better activists for the community than I am. And so I really wanted to have them in here because they've been telling these stories of our communities, but I think the true power of working with the museum's export collection was getting to bring together these two different strands that often existed as separate narratives because of these histories of decontextualization and separatism across the centuries. And so my goal with Long Time No See is to make it this project that indelibly ties our contemporary existences with ancestral ones. From a personal point of view, I know that I don't know if it's the ceramics that have adopted me or that I've adopted the ceramics, but as someone who's personally, my family tree is extremely small due to breaks that happen during immigration from one country to another country to a third, it's really amazing to me to think that now my work is tied directly to these objects' lives. And that it's mine and my community stories and the stories of the Asian American diaspora represented here that are now actually tied into the provenance that WNL has of the export ceramics. And so in this way, getting to write ourselves back into the record. Okay, so before I finish, I want to have a long list of people to thank. The team at the museums, both current and former, the long time no see interpretive consultants. My collaborators, they're Wing On Wo's Mei Lim and Gary Lim. Karen Sang's seal work is also represented, so you'll see that. I really, really, really want to thank Lin Oh and Jessica Zhang. I don't know, let's see, I think I saw Lin. Yay! They were studio assistants for me, and Lin was like, they were both the best studio assistants I could ever ask for. Oh yeah, they're up there putting things together. This really couldn't have happened without them. WNL's Art and Art History Department for giving me an incredible studio space and intellectual home for the time that I was making this work. Dave Pfaff at the IQ Center for helping me fabricate a lot of these like very odd requests. We made a couple of cake molds together. So he has those if you're interested. Facilities and Michael Rodenizer, who helped me build a 10-foot wall that we then created a lot of these still lifes in front of while I was here. The Office of State Sustainability and Nicole there, who manages the campus garden, pointed me to so many plants to use on back campus. And then the wider WNL and Lexington communities, Nadine, obviously, Baron Schwartz, who climbed into multiple trees to cut things down for me. It was really incredible. Susan Rothke at the flower fields grew all, like a lot of the flowers that you see. All the peonies and roses come from her. Sue Ann McCarthy, actually from the anthropology department, took one of the specimens that we finished with, which you will see in the galleries after we were done with it, Zach Wen, and then just everyone else who donated bugs and flowers and plant life. Thank you so, so much. I think this is a project that could not have been done anywhere else, and I really appreciate you having me for it.
Thank you. Does that work? It's a terrifying sound. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for that amazing talk and for this incredible project. Just to introduce myself, my name is Nayeli Guillen. I am the Associate Director of Curatorial Affairs for the museums at WNL. I'll be our MC for the back end of this portion of the evening. So we do have, I think, about 15 minutes or so, and we invite any of you here with us, if you have questions for Stephanie, to please raise your hand. We do have a couple of mic attendants kind of with us. For the recording, we ask that if you have a question, you directly speak it into the microphone so that way we can pick it up for prosperity. But please, ask us questions. Yes, I see a couple of hands right back here. She's coming to you right here.
Hi. This was an amazing talk, and thank you very much. I was wondering, why did you decide to go into linguistics and art instead of archaeology? Because this is such an archaeological talk in so many ways, and dealing with material culture and global world systems and fauna and flora. It seems like, since you're in linguistics, it seems like you're just parallel. So I was just wondering, and I was also wondering if you could tell people the story of the pig.
Sure. Has it been dug up yet?
We're not sure that it's supposed yet.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I went into linguistics for this talk because I am a linguist. That's what I trained in. That was sort of a historical accident that I went into linguistics. When I started undergrad, like many people who start as a freshman, I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do. I knew I was interested in things like music, English, business. Yeah, I know, weird. I just kind of like landed in undergrad. But it turns out when I took my first linguistics class. It was in the English department, and it was all about how people process language. And that was fascinating to me, was to understand the scientific structure behind it, and to understand sort of how the scientific structure behind something like poetry can lead to how we see the symbols in poetry. And that's something I just kept following. So maybe I should have taken an archaeology class, and I will go back in time to tell my freshman self to do so, but yeah, too late now. I mean, I guess I could still go back to archaeology, but too late now to start a new degree. Yeah. Oh, right, the pig. Okay, so when you go into the galleries, there's a pig's head. Oh, right, you saw it here. Gosh. That pig's head was ethically sourced from a farm in Pennsylvania. It was shipped here via FedEx. It lived in the refrigerator in the art and history department for a couple of days. I apologize to anyone who opened the refrigerator at the time. It was treated very nicely in the studio. It was very happy to be there, as you could see. Afterwards, Sue Ann was kind enough to take a donation of a pig's head so that they could bury it on back campus, wait till it decomposes, and use the bones for comparisons for students. I can't do this justice, but I think comparing like a commercial pig's bones with wild boar, is that what it was? Comparing archaeological samples to the... Oh, got it, yeah. So I'm very excited for whoever gets to do that. You'll have to send me pictures.
Right here.
Oh, you have this very beautiful, distinct color and lighting. You have very consistent color and lighting in your style. Who are some artists or photographers that have influenced this color or this love of color and lighting?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, going to the Dutch tradition, Rachel Roush, who was one of the big female painters at the time. She does the most incredible floral still lifes that have life to them in a way that many of the other still lifes don't. This is like a big trademark of hers, so big influence from that time period. More contemporarily, I guess, there's obviously Raphael Peale, who was the first American still life painter. You'll see some references to him in the galleries. After Raphael Peale, there was Sharon Corr, who is a contemporary American photographer, and one of her first projects was actually photographically recreating all of Raphael Peale's early American still lifes. And this is an incredible project because we don't have a lot of those varietals of fruits and vegetables anymore. So she spent a couple years actually growing the fruits and vegetables in her own garden. So those are people who I love in terms of the subject matter and the lighting. The colors, I can't fully explain. I think it's my way of giving the finger to the very, very staged tradition of like religious still life. Yeah.
More questions? Oh gosh, okay, up top. We've got several hands that are up on the second floor.
I can stream down there. If that's fine. You can repeat it.
Oh yeah, if you can repeat your question. Yeah. Go ahead.
Just a quick question about, like, I've been working with you, but I'm also curious about if you have any specific emotion, like, no, okay, sorry, I need to rephrase. Any work that conveys very strong emotion, any type of emotions, especially in relation to your identity as Asian American?
Like any work that I look at, or
Yeah, any work that you think that conveys the strongest emotions.
like influences or my own work.
Just like as like within the meaning of the word.
Mine.
My
own work. Okay. So the question was, let me try to repeat this. Are there any pieces within my own work that you think really convey a strong emotion in terms of identity? I mean, all of them.
I was just curious about what types of emotions that you put in each work.
Yeah. Good question. I think this is a good question for you because you were in the studio with me. I think, as Lynn will attest, in the studio, I'm just kind of running around like a chicken with my head cut off, trying to get everything like captured before the flowers all die on me, which happens very quickly when you're working with wild specimens. I think the emotion really comes from the concepting. Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm not answering this very well.
Were there other questions up in the top deck? Yeah, why don't we do the same? If you can
Sure, yeah, I can
speak
try
it
to
down,
repeat.
Stephanie will repeat it into the microphone.
I'm curious about two things. One was why the pig's head, and the other was how much did you know about the ceramics before you approached the project?
Okay, just repeating the questions. Why the pig's head? And how much did I know about the ceramics before I approached the project? So let's see, I don't have a great slide of the ceramics of the pig's head, but I'll put this up. If you go into the galleries and you actually just go look at the objects, it's much easier to see these. All of these ceramics are from a particular style. They're armorial porcelain. So armorial porcelain was when wealthy or people of access, European and European Americans, would commission large dinnerware sets made in China with their family crests on it. And W&L has an incredible collection of armorial porcelain. There's an entire room in the galleries dedicated to this. You can see all different sorts of crests, and some of the crests are really wild and fun. All of the ones here are from one of the earliest known collections of the sort, sets of the sort. It's from a captain who worked at the British East India Company. So he sailed on these ships to China and was able to buy these. He was Goff, so these are the Goff plates. His family crest was a boar's head with an arrow sticking through it. The boar's head was supposed to symbolize like courage and bravery. And I'm not an expert on crests, so I might be getting this wrong, but I think the practice was when you married, you would impale your crest with your wife's family. And so that's where we get the arrow. And it's such a wild design to have on your dinnerware that was, really struck me when I first got to W&L, and I had very much wanted to work with a pig's head up till this point as a great excuse. And if the museums is paying for me to get a pig's head, why not? But yeah, I think similarly in Chinese symbology, pigs, which we often associate like generally as like a bad symbol, like the crest in Chinese symbology, pigs are often associated with wealth and status because you had to be wealthy in order to eat pork, or you worked all year to raise one pig and you sold it at market and kept some of that money for yourself for a New Year's Eve festival celebration, right? And so there's this almost double-edged meaning to pigs and boars that I really wanted to play with this particular piece. Yeah. As to your second question about how much I knew about these ceramics, before I got to W&L, zilch, absolutely nothing. I came for a 2-week research trip before my residency, a couple months before, and luckily the museums have wonderful books already written about a lot of their collection, so I studied those heavily as well. Got to go through the collections with the curators and the registrars here, which was an incredible experience to go down into storage. And then we had a wonderful interpretation team and curatorial team. I peppered Rachel Du, who will be here for 3 months doing Asian art, with tons of questions about the ceramics. And she was incredibly helpful. So I learned so much in the process of this project, and I'm really grateful to have gotten to do that, about ceramics specifically.
Do we have time for one more? Maybe one more question from a final brave soul in the audience? Mike, or Matthew over here.
This is dazzling, and so I'm struck by, we've talked about linguistic calcs, we've talked about invasive plants, we've talked about export-import, and in some ways it seems like these are all 3 different words for the same thing. And I worked with a student a couple of years ago who talked about invasive plants as that's a value judgment, and that's more so than maybe an ecological evaluation. And so I'm wondering, do you think about any of the porcelain, either in the context of invasion, or is there discussion, for example, of the porcelain as a type of invasion, or are these all sort of three of the same thing?
Yeah, the porcelain themselves oftentimes aren't discussed as invasive because they were brought here as statuses and symbols of wealth for wealthy Americans and Europeans, right? So they chose to put it in their parlors to sort of demonstrate. However, invasion is definitely used if you look at Chinese exclusion era documents about Chinese people. The invasive plant thing is kind of interesting. Now, there is undeniably a way in which plants that aren't supposed to be here, insects as well, screw up the ecosystems that exist. I'm not saying that should happen. But if you look at sort of the linguistic worlds in which these things exist, a lot of the names of these invasive plants that were non-native plants that were brought over in the 1800s are tied with where they're from. So you get things like Chinese wisteria or Japanese honeysuckle, other examples that are missing right now in my mind. The only example of this from Europe tends to be English ivy. All of the other ones have non-place related names. And if you start looking at the plant literature online, which I had to do a lot of in the research of this particular project, you start seeing that when people are referring to these things that come from Asia, especially during this time period, they're talked about as metaphorically monstrous or devouring, or they take over. Whereas English ivy is almost never talked about that way, even though it's as destructive sometimes to trees and such. So there's sort of a interesting linguistic difference behind how we're talking about these plants. That's worth looking at later. Yeah.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and wrap up Q&A. Thank you once again, Stephanie, for this amazing talk. And to all of you for joining us this evening. It's really wonderful to see this room so packed, not only with people from the university, but with folks from the community. Just to sort of wrap us out and sort of set us on our next step for the evening, we can't say at the museums how proud we are of this artist residency and the resulting exhibition. Long time no see. As many of you already know, the mission of the museums at WNL is to encourage direct engagement with the collections, in essence, to promote learning and critical thinking through art and objects, and foster an appreciation of art, history, and culture amongst our constituents. Long time no see really shines a new and very important light on the museum's renowned collection of Chinese export porcelain. These beautiful luxury items have, of course, been the subject of rigorous study and utilized for teaching at WNL for many decades. However, at this moment, the museums at WNL, like many other museums across the country, are committed to the important work of expanding and broadening our interpretations of these complex historical artifacts. And Long Time No See is a really great project for us to really bring that home here on campus. I do want to sort of give a little plug. The exhibition did also come along with a resulting catalog. So you'll see the pink over here on my right, along with our friends from the University Bookstore. All proceeds from the book benefit the museums at WNL and future programs like this one. So please do check out the book, purchase the book, and the other items from the bookstore. Speaking of future events, next week, we do also have another artist talk and reception for our other capstone project exhibition that is opening next week, Emma Steinkraus's Long Time No See, Dusk and Dawn. That will be opening on Wednesday next week, and the Emma's talk and reception will be on Thursday, October 3rd in the evening. The talk will be at Northern Auditorium in Leyburn Library, and then we will convene, as we will tonight, to the exhibition gallery to experience the show with the artist. We welcome you at this point both to enjoy the food that is here in CGL and convene with us to the Reeves Museum of Ceramics to view the exhibition. We will begin sort of packing up in here, but please do eat, and we will have additional refreshments in the Reeves for you to enjoy in the atrium. Thank you so much for being with us this evening, and please stay with us.